Hey everybody, it's Dr. Tom Moorcroft here. Super excited to be with everyone tonight. Stopping in a couple minutes early here to just kind of get rolling, make sure everything's really good. So wait to see when this pops up on the screen and make sure that we're all here. Give everybody a few minutes to check in. Hopefully this will start posting. There we go. All right. Looks like we're up and running. So I'm really excited for this evening. This is something I've been looking forward to doing for a while. The super cool part. Hi Heather, how are you? All right. Looks like you might be the first one here. So just kind of hanging out. Oh, got a couple people here. And I'm just going to kind of let everybody have a chance to check in. And, because got a big agenda, I'm super excited, but I know that a lot of people are finishing up their day. Got a couple other folks popping in. Fantastic. Hi, Elena. How's it going? Long time no see. All right. Looking forward to seeing Owen as well. So, how's the sound? Is everything working all right on your end? Sound pretty good? All right. I meant to... Hi, Sarah. How are you? So I meant to have some extra cool music in the background, but, at the same time, sometimes you forget those things at the last minute here. So, tonight's really an exciting time for me. I've been wanting to do this presentation actually for a really long time, and, there's always something that pops up. But like I tell people, we all need to take care of ourselves and we all need to jump in and just go for it without waiting around any longer. So I figured I should probably, practice what I preach. And so that's what we're here doing tonight. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump in and, start going through this kind of like a lecture. I'll just sort of go through some of the important things that I see that I think people need to know about healing Lyme brain. And let's see if I can even get this up and running here with the screen share. Hopefully that'll work. Some things are blocking me. Yeah, this way at least hopefully you guys will get a chance to see. And, I hate becoming the little guy in the corner there, but I think it's important to be able to take a look at some of this stuff. So my plan here is to really talk about healing Lyme brain and really focus on the connection between the gut and the brain as ways to, both learn about the fundamental brain detoxification pathways and gut pathways and see how they work together so that we can, they help with memory and healing overall. And so what I'll do is I'm going to walk through. I'm going to try to keep an eye on some of the comments. It's a little hard with all the screens. So Elena's going to be taking down some questions, and I'm going to make sure that we get to all of those at the end. So as we walk through all of this, you'll start to see how it all sort of comes together and hopefully answer a lot of the questions that people have that, about the brain and why we talk about the gut and the microbiome so much. And for everybody who stays at the end, I'm going to have a little thank you gift and, just some resources that will help you dive deeper into some of this stuff. So, hi Renee and Karen, and I think I saw Brian in there too. So what we'll do is we'll get started here and dive right in with all this. And, I see people all the time who... they come in, their brain's not working so well, they might be at work and they're not getting their job done as efficiently as they used to. They might be struggling, in conversations. They might sort of be in the middle of a sentence and forget things. And often we'll also see a lot of our children, rather than having, they'll see things like decreases in school performance, acute behavioral changes, and we really want to dive into that. But the other part of of this mind-body connection thing and this brain piece, it's so important, is there really is, it's not just like our thinking processes as well, like can I do 3 times 3 and come up with 9, or do I come up with 11 like I used to do? Really the thing is we have to think about, what we're thinking about, like kind of like where our mind is in the whole thing. And if we're focused, so when people come into the office, I often will hear things like, hey, my Lyme is acting up, or my Bartonella is causing this, right? And so already what we see is that someone's become attached to a diagnosis like Lyme disease or Bartonella, and it's become theirs. And this is one of the things that I wanted to start with, because the more we focus on a particular thing, the more likely it is to have, to actually be the outcome. So a lot of people are saying, hey, I've got Lyme disease, I can never get better because I read it on Facebook or Google or whatever. And, if you believe in that, that's actually going to become true. But if you can set your sights, a year and a half in the future, you're going to be in a situation where if you have a dream of what life looks like when you're healthy and feeling better, that's when you're really going to have an opportunity to get to that place. So you give yourself a half a chance by having that mindset. And so just kind of to put that in your ears, we're going to talk about that at the end, but it's something that's important to start to consider right from the beginning. What I would prefer is that, people come in and tell me what's wrong, right? And let me know what they're experiencing in their life. So from my own personal experience of this, I had a job when I was 23, and I was doing outdoor education. I was teaching children. This was my passion. This is the thing that I really, really wanted to do with my life, is to go outside and not only be able to play and get paid to play outside, but also to help teach, the next generation of people to love and respect the planet and enjoy it. And then one day I remember my boss is like, Tom, and I'm like, what? And in this moment, I was kind of like completely out of it, sitting at my desk, and I realized I was just staring at a blank wall. And there was actually some drool on my shirt. And so this was kind of like a wake up, and I was like, what is going on with me? And my friend Chris was like, Tom, there's something really wrong with your performance. And I don't know what's going on, but I'm scared. I think you need to go see the doctor. And so, I went to see the doc, and by the time I actually was able to get in to see the doctor, I had a rash that covered about a fifth of my body. And not only was I not able to remember almost anything, but I had this excruciating pain in all my joints and muscles. And that's really, that was really a tough time, and I didn't know what was going on. I walked into his office, and he just goes, it could have been 15 seconds. And this is like my dad's guy, his doc for his whole life. And I walk in, he's like, Tom, you've got classic Lyme disease, good to go. Here's your doxy for 10 days and you'll be fine, right? And so for the first couple of days, I just laid on the floor, and I was shaking and I was sweating and all this stuff. And no one told us anything about a Herxheimer. Nobody told us to think about other potential causes of drenching sweats in the middle of, alternating with chills in the middle of July. And so, what happened over time was just kind of like I got better. 4 or 5 days later, I felt a little bit better. I finished my 10 days. And over the next 8 years, I had this really interesting set of symptoms where I couldn't think clearly. My joints and my muscles hurt. I was really pissed off about it, And so they're like, oh, you're depressed or you're angry. And I'm like, I know people who are depressed. I wasn't depressed. I felt like crap, and nobody was listening, right? So fast forward 8 years, I happened to be in somebody's office doing a rotation in medical school, and accidentally found out that I had Lyme disease because I walked in and they were treating all these people with Lyme. But what was really interesting about it, when I came up to them at the end of the day, I said, look, what these people have, I have. And they're like, what? And I said, the brain, the muscle pain, the joint pain, I can't think, everything hurts. My wife would just barely touch me, and my arm would feel like a lightsaber was shoved into it. And what I learned from that was, because I described that to him, not only did he look for Lyme, but he looked for Bartonella and babesiosis. And my babesia, 8 years after my initial bite, actually turned out to still be positive. And over the next 4.5, 5 years, we got all that straightened away, and I've been feeling great for almost a decade now. But it's really important that we, because right now we know that Borrelia miyamotoi looks a lot like anaplasmosis, a lot like babesia, crossed with Lyme disease. So it's getting a little more complex. But let's walk into people's offices and let them know what's going on, and then let them, help us understand what that could be. Now, that certainly doesn't suggest that we should not say, hey, maybe I've got Lyme disease and babesia, could you look at that? I'm certainly suggesting that's okay. But really dive into your symptoms or your children's symptoms, because they're the things that are really going to be the clues to us as medical detectives and your doctors to try to help you with that. So just an important piece. And one of the things I find that's like super important is that we have this roadmap. You know, we really want to, and the best way to have a roadmap is to sit down and create a partnership, you know, with whoever the patient is, child or adult, and the family and the doctor, and we sit down and we come up with a step-by-step process from, you know, where we are today to where we're going. But a lot of what you're going to find is that the people who don't get better from Lyme or from Bartonella or PANS or whatever it may be, is we find the sort of the key to unlocking their symptoms and unlocking their diseases so that they can get better in looking outside of, like, you know, tick-borne illness, so to speak. So we look at nutrition, and we look at hormonal balance, and we look at sleep habits, and we're going to dive into some of those tonight and why they're so important. So again, just to reiterate, that's why we really need to show up and maybe say, hey, maybe Lyme or Babesia, we'll look into that, maybe some PANS, but please also just share with your doctor the symptoms so that they can really help you figure it out. So right here, what we see in the middle here, highlighted in the orange, is a thing called the Hippocampal Formation, right? And this is a part of the limbic system. And, you know, big fancy words, basically it's an area deep inside the brain that helps us a lot with emotions and thoughts and spatial awareness. And so here's, you know, if we kind of change it from the person, so if I go back 1 second, you know, looking to the left of the screen, we've got the eyes, and then we've got the front of the brain moving back, and right below that hippocampal formation, you see the brainstem going down, and all of this is kind of directly to the middle of the ears. So then if we go back here, we see the hippocampus deep in here. And for, you know, those of you who aren't anatomy geeks, the reason that we want to learn about this is this area that's been cut away here is called the temporal lobe, right? And that's going to be an important piece to remember because that's going to kind of be more out here just deep to the ears in this area, and the hippocampus is going to be more in the middle there. So, and it's kind of an interesting thing because it loops from out here all the way back deeper into the brain. So we'll see why that's important in a moment. And right here what we have is a rat brain, an illustration of that. So if you could imagine a human being kind of laying out with their head sort of forward, almost like standing like a dog would or a rat, you know, and you would tip your head up to be able to look. And so the front of the brain is over here on the, see if we can use a pointer a little bit, on the left of the screen, and then you see the brainstem back here all the way on the right. And in the middle here, this part that says HPC, that's the hippocampus. And then the frontal, the part more to the left is the medium prefrontal cortex. And that's like super important because what happens is the hippocampus processes a lot of contextual information, a lot of memories, a lot of spatial awareness. But then in order to kind of hold on to it and then to use it again, it actually has to work with prefrontal cortex. And so when we look at Lyme disease, this is actually a super important loop to be aware of. So hippocampus is helping us make memories, we're helping to store it, and then in order to retrieve those memories, we've got that prefrontal cortex, which is very helpful. So this is a SPECT scan, or a scan of metabolism in the brain of someone with Lyme. And what we're looking at here is on the right side of the screen is the left side of the person's brain. So it's kind of like they're looking at you. And what you see in the middle here is that, you know, the part of that median prefrontal cortex. And then on the bottom, on the right and the left, you're seeing actually parts of the temporal lobe. And so we look at the research of Drs. Danta and Bransfield and a lot of other people. What we're finding is that Lyme is messing with prefrontal cortex and the temporal lobes. And so when we dive into the literature and we say, hey, what is this actually causing? We see things like, you know, neuropsychiatric Lyme symptoms, panic attacks, we see depression, we see bipolar, OCD, and some of the other things you see listed there. And this is back from Dr. Fallon's research in 1994. Then, if we look further, Dr. Bransfield has looked at over 300 different peer-reviewed articles in the medical literature, and he said, hey, look, executive functioning is messed up, attention. So maybe somebody with ADHD, you know, or somebody with memory loss could have psychiatric Lyme. Processing speed is often really screwed up by this. We have a lot of things like low frustration tolerance, depression, irritability, anxiety, etc. But now if we go right into the middle, you know, we look at like sensory hyperacusis. This is kind of like our sensory overload, right? We've got things like sound sensitivity and light sensitivity that are associated with this. And then we're tired because we get non-restorative sleep, and we'll see that that's a really important thing in this. Dr. Bransfield's work, as well as the work of most of us, have seen that, hey, if you've got a co-infection with one or more different bugs on top of Lyme, it's going to be worse. And there's tons of articles that really support this, including articles even coming out of Yale in the recent years that are showing that this is an important thing. So that's a little bit about the brain and how we sort of make memories and where Lyme can impact it. But now what we want to do is take a look here, and we see that the brain is actually, if you follow the yellow all the way down, going to be connected down into the gastrointestinal system. And also in the middle there, it even connects to the heart. And so just from the basic topics that are here that are important to think about are, we have gastrointestinal and liver, which is what hepatic means, manifestations of tick-borne illness. This is stuff that every doctor should be aware of. This is sort of just by the textbook. But then we look at, some of the things that might not be in the textbook. And Dr. Fried did a lot of work down in New Jersey in his gastrointestinal practice with GI Lyme, and what we see is things like gastroparesis, which came up in our support group discussion the other day, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, even like the mimicking of Crohn's or colitis by Lyme and or co-infections. And with successful treatment, these things can be reversed. So we have a few other things in here: abdominal pain and diarrhea, food sensitivities. These are all things that we can see in Lyme. But what's really super cool to me is that spatial and episodic memory are impacted by the vagus nerve from the gut. And so if we kind of go back for 1 second here and trace the connection, the big yellow nerve that's going down there is the vagus nerve. And this provides a connection between the brain and 2/3 of the entire gastrointestinal tract. So then we head back here and we say, look, not only episodic or short-term memory is impacted, but spatial awareness. So how many people do you know with Lyme disease who are bumping in the walls, not knowing where they are in space, or you come into my office and I ask them to walk in a straight line with their heel and toe touch, and their balance looks terribly off, or if we close their eyes, they're off. This can actually be impacted by the vagus nerve. Now there's this other stuff here that they talk about in this paper, and it basically means the connection between these two areas is extremely complex. And there's multiple different pathways going from the gut to the brain back and forth. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. But what really kind of was almost disturbing to me when I saw this article, and you see it's a 2018 article, is this was previously unknown. Right? So people are like, hey, we didn't know that if we clip the vagus nerve between the gut and the brain, memory wouldn't work. Which is a little scary to think that that's the state of science to me. Because if we look back, we actually do know there are connections. And this is a cool illustration for me. I really like it. It's one of my favorite. So at the very bottom, that thing that says enteric microbiota, that's basically your gut microbiome. That's the good and the balance of the good and bad bacteria and the fungi that live in your gut. Then we have the epithelium, or the skin cells, and the muscles. But the ENS is the nervous system of the gut. So we have really 3 autonomic nervous systems in our body that control the automatic functions of everything that's going on: our brain, our heart, and our gut. And what we see is that there's a relationship through the arrows on here, actually the vagus nerve, where we're seeing the brain and the gut having a direct feedback loop between each other. And then if we do a little bit further, we look and we say, hey, the gut impacts how the hypothalamus functions. This is a part of the brain in the endocrine system that has to do with metabolism, sleep, and feeding behaviors. So some of our children with like an acute pandas episode may have restriction of eating. Some of our Lyme and Bartonella kids, same thing. So it could be that directly there's an issue going on in their gut, but the other thing is that it could also be that there's an issue going on with the control of the hypothalamus because of what's going on in the gut. And this can be either direct from infection in the muscular wall, or this could be because of an imbalance in the gut. Now we also see the amygdala, and the amygdala is actually that loop that we looked at earlier on the hippocampus. It's right on the front. And this is an interesting it's like a little walnut almost, and it's related to fear responses and has a lot to do with social information. So I remember when I was in medical school, I should say in residency, I saw an article where they looked at functional MRI, right? So they looked at how different parts of the brain lit up and how they were functioning under certain, stresses. And so one of the experiments they did is they took 3 people and they asked them to throw a ball back and forth. But what was interesting is they did it over a computer. So everybody was remote, but they were all just 3 throwing the ball back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. But with that, what we found was at one point the researchers said, hey, they told 2 people to just start throwing the ball back and forth, and leave the other person out. And then they took all of them to the scanner, and what they found is that the person left out had their amygdala as well as this other thing called that's coming up here. Well, hey, why don't I just put them all there? The anterior cingulate gyrus there. Cognitive emotional interactions. These 2 areas were really lit up, and this person felt left out. They felt bad about themselves. They felt like they weren't good enough. And what was really interesting about the whole study was there was only one person in it. So the 2 other people were actually just part of the computer model. And so this person felt dissed, like they felt left out, and they had this biochemical change as if they had this horrible emotional response that we could see in their brain. But literally no one had left them out of anything. It was just a computer program that when a researcher hit a button, stopped throwing them the ball. So you think about our kids, online doing all these gaming and texting and all the other cool stuff that we get to do these days. And you'd think about it, it's really important to keep an eye on what's going on and supervise that. Other parts of where the gut and the brain are communicating to each other, we see on the right the hippocampus has a lot to do with learning and the spatial processing as we've been talking. And prefrontal cortex is that processing. I mean, how many times are you just like, you get stuck and you're like, I can't get the things that I used to do. I'm not thinking the way I did a couple years ago, and it's not because I'm super old. It's because I'm no longer, there's a problem going on with my prefrontal cortex and I just can't process complex information. The other thing that's really impressive and important to understand is the enteric nervous system of the gut has a lot to do with regulating the brain and the limbic system. So we look at things like serotonin, our happy drug. So a lot of people try to put our kids and our adults on, serotonin and we should say like Zoloft and Paxil, these serotonin selective reuptake inhibitors, and to keep them happy. But a lot of times it's just there's something going on in their gut. The other thing is we find GABA is a thing that kind of keeps us from the lid on us, so we don't just like explode and we don't have all this, super anxiety or super rage. It's kind of puts that cap on. That's all of these neurotransmitters are regulated through the gut. So that's another important piece of this. Another piece of information that's important to understand about the gut is we can change memories and the ability to make them based on different stressors. And so if we have Citrobacter and we infect mice, which is a pretty common infection that you can see, especially if you're doing stool tests, we can see this in people, Citrobacter. Within 8 hours, we can cause anxiety, and then we also know that from research, diet will induce memory changes. And if you breed a mouse to have no bacteria in its gut, to be germ-free, they're going to have a very exaggerated stress response, right? So we're saying, hey, if we change the bacterial load in the gut, we can have a lot of issues with just thinking. So it doesn't even have to be Lyme or Bartonella or babesiosis or whatever. It could be just that we have a bacterial shift from having some gummy bears or, having a Twinkie or whatever. I heard those came back on the market. So, and then the other thing is, spatial memory defects can also be linked with a whole bunch of things directly to that hippocampus. So that's a critical piece to remember. And so this is kind of like a little sciencey, but I think it's important for the practical pieces. So we also know that if we infect these mice, even a month later, we can still have their memory messed up from this particular study. But if we administer probiotics before and during an infection, it actually prevents memory dysfunction. So, and then these germ-free mice, if we breed them that have no germs in their gut, they actually will not have the ability to make memories even if they're not stressed out. So if we're stressed out, that'll change our ability to make memories. But if we also have a bad microbiome, we may be able to have problems there. So then people said, oh, this is kind of cool. Let's coin a new phrase, because we need more phrases in medicine, right? And so we have psychobiotics. And these psychobiotics are basically probiotics that have been studied to help in neuropsychiatric conditions, right? And so we're looking at the gut-brain axis. And if we give particular probiotics, we can decrease cortisol levels. The other thing we can do is we can decrease anxiety. And what's really interesting about this to me is that the research has very specifically found that this is tracked through the vagus nerve. And so again, we're going to keep coming back to the vagus nerve because it's that direct connection between the brain, the heart, and the gut, and we'll see a lot more about that in a minute. The other thing is, we actually, by taking certain probiotics and getting that microbiome balanced, we can actually decrease inflammatory markers in the brain itself. So, I mean, this alone, is so important for being able to maintain our memory, is just having a good bacterial balance. The problem is our conventional diets of fast food and commercial baked goods actually can screw the gut microbiome up and actually set us up for a risk of depression that can be 50% higher than it would have been otherwise. And, this is kind of scary. I have a 9-year-old. I'm kind of she really tries to eat well, but she likes to go out with her friends, and there's Halloween and all these other things. And they found in this, consumption of commercial baked goods or fast food as little as 2 times a week leads to up to the 51% increase in depression. And I mean, this is done in Spain, so I'm sure somebody will tell you this doesn't apply to the United States. But this is a big deal, right? And so what we're putting in our mouths makes a huge difference. And we see that, we go back here, we're talking about inflammation in the brain can be from an imbalance in the bacterial balance, and part of that bacterial balance is changed because of these fast foods and such. So, however you get it, we got to get more veggies in. And so some people on the bottom right are going to say, I like the cheese. Some people are going to say, I don't. Some people are going to say, don't have the meat. Some people will. Some people say, leave out the beans in the middle. You can have an crudité platter. You can have some sauces and maybe some cheese. You can even make really cool designs. But the bottom line is, you need to get more vegetables in your diet. And this is super important through all the research we've seen. We look at Dr. Terry Walls and how she's reversing MS and the symptoms associated with MS. We look at Dr. Darren Engels and his work and his Lyme Solution book, and a gazillion other authors. If you look on Amazon and you go find a whole bunch of people talking about reversing autoimmune this or that, fixing this, increasing your testosterone, bumping up your estrogen, every diet out there says eat more vegetables. And so we just need to get a little creative and get them into our diets, and this can be done. But it's critical. And we know it's critical because there's so many studies out there that show that the Western diet screws up our gut and in turn screws up the way we think. And so if you look a little deeper at that, in this study they said, let's feed mice a standard American diet. And so the first thing you see in the middle there, right below the mouse, is that we have altered gut bacteria. Then we decrease the short-chain fatty acids, and it leads to some inflammation, and we have a leaky gut phenomena, which is where you see those spaces occurring there. And then as we go in, we have the bacterial load is getting higher, and endotoxin levels are getting higher within the bloodstream. Because the thing is right now we're getting larger particles of food going in than we actually usually would and should, and that's leading to these problems. The problem, though, is once this starts to get a higher bacterial load in the gut, in the bloodstream, and these endotoxins, we're going to run into lowering of insulin sensitivity, which, kind of in layman's terms, means we're going to end up with higher blood sugar levels, right, which is going to lead to more inflammation, and we're going to have increase in inflammation. And cytokines are just things that trigger inflammation in the body. So then, if we go over to the right there, it's saying after that happens, from eating that, and we get this inflammation, we're actually going to disrupt the blood-brain barrier. So many people are worried about their drugs and their herbs getting into the brain to treat their neuro-Lyme or their neuro-Bartonella or whatever. Most of the time, you don't have to worry about it because the gut is already done that for you. And so by having this leaky gut situation and eating a crappy diet, then we have the blood-brain barrier that's like that. And then we run into things like hippocampal dysfunction. And and that basically goes back to our memory changes. And that's a really critical piece to understand, is that what we put in our mouth here with the mouse goes all the way over to breaking down the blood-brain barrier and causing us to have emotional and memory issues. But then a lot of us who treat Lyme and Bartonella, PANS, and all this start to see that we need to look at mold and mycotoxicity. And so we start talking about the gut microbiome, and they've actually found that certain mycotoxins can be extremely toxic to the gut microbiome itself. So a lot of times when we're going to talk about what mycotoxins do for pain and for our brain and everything, they're actually able to destroy the good bacteria in your gut directly. So then it's kind of that double whammy situation. And the problem is most people's primary exposure to dietary mycotoxins is through grains. So I'm not a person who tells people to get off, everybody needs to get off grains. Some people do, some people don't. But we have to think about the source of our grains, and are we having a mycotoxin exposure? So the quality of our food really is an important thing to think about. So kind of a quick sidebar on mycotoxins, right? So these are the toxins from certain species of mold. There's tons of them that do things like aspergillus from our environment. Even if we get colonized with it, can be a big issue. So I kind of like these pictures. They're kind of pretty, but I don't want a lot of them in me or in my environment. And one of the things as it relates to the way we think and experience things are the problem is mycotoxins not only target the gut bacteria, but they target enzymes like cholinesterase that break things down in our body that are good to break things down. And so we have these particular cholinesterases called neuroligands, and these things have been directly associated with autism. And while autism is very distinctly different than PANS, we do have a lot of overlap in some of the treatments and the dysfunction within the body that leads to symptoms that we need to address. And so one of the things, we have certain mutations that are associated with autism that actually make patients more susceptible to the negative effects of mycotoxins. And this is a relatively recent research out of Italy, but I'd be willing to bet that in a couple more years we're going to see people who are more sensitive to things like Lyme and Bartonella or having PANS may also have certain mutations not only associated with having greater, sort of negative effects from these infections, but also to other environmental toxins like the mycotoxins, which is why I leave this in here, something to think about. We don't want to be exposed to mold if we don't have to. So, one of the things we have to think about is our brains are fried, right? I mean, we talk about brain on fire all the time with pandas and PANS, somewhat with autism. Certainly adults who know what I'm talking about if, you're stressed out or things are going on, or you don't know what's going on, which is what happened to me. I'm just like, my brain does not work, and literally was at the point where I honestly couldn't answer what was 2 times 3 without thinking about it for 30 seconds. So that's a little scary to somebody who has the ability to be a doctor. Thankfully, I do know how to do that right now, and things are a lot better. But this is one of the things that we really have to be thinking about. And the whole reason I did this whole sort of anatomy and physiology lesson and started talking a little bit about diet is to get us to this point where we understand the gut and the brain are totally directly related to each other. And it's absolutely critical that we don't forget that when people talk to me about brain detoxification, we also need to talk about the gut and the gut health to help that. So when we want to look directly at ways to detoxify the brain, I think this is one of the last super sciencey things we do here, is at the top where we see the number 1 here, we see a little arterial, right? And basically we talk about the system of detox in the body uses the lymphatic system quite a bit to drain things, right? So a lot of us have heard of lymph nodes and stuff like that, and people talk about lymphatic drainage. Well, in the brain, there are some true lymphatics, but not as much as throughout the rest of the body. So we look at this other system called glymphatic, and basically there's fluid flow that comes down in along these arterioles that go deep into the brain. And then it kind of goes across the brain. There's a flow between this cerebrospinal fluid and the interstitial fluids. And then it just goes from the left where the artery is over to the right to the veins. And then you see the dark stuff that looks like little turds. That's actually stuff like tau proteins and amyloid, which are things that are associated with Alzheimer's. And so then we see that that's the way we drain. So basically there's this cool fluid wave that moves through the brain and drains it. But one of the most important things to consider here is when is it most active. And on the right we see the waking state, and on the left we see the sleep state. And when you look at these, they change the colors, but the flow is dramatically more in the sleeping state than in wake. And I've seen numbers as high as potentially 90% of brain detoxification is occurring while sleeping. So this is a really critical time for all of us who want to keep our brains healthy, or if we're not doing well, to focus on to get our brain doing better. And the space, this lymphatic space is actually something like 60% bigger during sleep, which is allowing it to function more because it is a low pressure system. So this is just a fancy drawing that shows all the different ways it drains. But I just want to focus you in for a moment on this thing called cribriform plate here. Sorry, I went too fast. Right in the middle of the forehead. That's basically right up here, and the drainage from the nerve of smell. We have lymphatics that go around it, and they drain through the nose and then follow those lines deep into the neck. That's really all you really need to know from this slide is the drainage from the brain, somewhere between 15 and 30%, comes through that cribriform plate, goes through the nasal lymphatic, which is basically the floor of the head and the top of the nose, goes through the nasal lymphatics into your neck and then into the systemic circulation. And I'm going to show you why that's important. And right here, this is a scan where we're looking at people who are quote unquote normal, right? And so the red is what should be happening through that cribriform plate. Here's at the bottom somebody who has Alzheimer's. And what we see is a dramatic decrease in the drainage through the nose. And the important piece of this drainage through the nose situation is that, it's when if we go back here and we look at these amyloid and these tau protein, these little turds I talked about, those are the things that are going out. And when we go here and we look at Alzheimer's, it's not going out the way it's supposed to go. And we actually see in sleep deprivation, people in their 30s and 40s will end up having rapid deposition of amyloid and early cognitive decline that's very similar to early Alzheimer's that we're more used to seeing in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. So if you want to give yourself Alzheimer's, don't sleep well. I wouldn't recommend doing that. So one of the things I think is super important for people to consider is, what do you do at home? And one of the things that we do at home, then we do at our house all the time, is to turn off the Wi-Fi. So, if you use it a lot during the day, just put it on a timer. Have it go off when you go to bed, and then when you wake up in the morning, let it automatically turn back on. Set it and forget it. You'll notice in the first couple of nights you might sleep a little funky, and after that you'll actually sleep a lot more deeply. The other thing, too, is you can also, late at night, use fancy things called blue blockers. These are ones that Dave Asprey makes. I also have other ones. I think it's called True Light or something like that. But then they have Gunner glasses or really good gaming glasses. So the people who want to be in front of the computer a lot during the day can use these. These are going to cut down on some of the blue light that messes with your melatonin. And that melatonin, which is one of your sleep hormones, if we get exposed to too much blue light at night, it stays low and you don't sleep as well. So this is something that we really should be thinking about wearing later in the evening, 8:30, 9 o'clock, if we're going to bed around 10:30 or 11, kind of start to turn those electronics down at night. So that's something, you can do. And you can, these are, they range anywhere from $10 on up to like $100, $120. You can even get them prescription. But you can certainly search for blue blockers and get them, pretty inexpensively. The other thing is on things like iPhones, you can use Night Shift to bring out the blue light. There's a free program called Flux, which will really be helpful. And there's some resources that can help you guys. So now I want to head back here because we talk a lot about intranasal infections, Marcons, and things like the nasosinus biofilms in mycotoxin illness. So Dr. Shoemaker's done a lot of work here, as well as Dr. Brewer. And while they have different opinions of what each of these two things I posted up there mean, we know that infections in the nose are important to think about. Now, if we're thinking about pans and pandas, we have things like way on the left we see the nose, right? And GAS is group A strep. And so in the middle here, right behind the nose there, you see the nasal associated lymphatic tissue, or NALT. And we see that we have some of our Th17 cells, which are just immune system cells that are coming to get the strep. And when they come for one strep infection, everything's hunky-dory, it's totally cool. But if we look here on the right, with multiple infections, the more someone is exposed to a particular infection, the more we have congregation of our own immune cells in the nasal passage. It goes up the same nasal lymphatic pathway through that cribiform plate that I showed you earlier, and it goes directly into the brain and breaks down the blood-brain barrier. It causes reactivation of the immune cells of the brain, which are the microglia, and we get cross-reactive antibodies, which basically means this is one way that strep can trigger pandas. It can trigger an autoimmune encephalitis. And we find mycoplasma, we find, chlamydia, and then we find these mycotoxins in the nose as well. And so this might be one of the reasons a lot of our kids are getting triggered into PANS, and a lot of our adults are sort of kind of looking like they are too. So this is really important, the nasal drainage pathway. One of the things that I often cover, I didn't throw it in here, but I want to let you guys know about, is Buteyko breathing is a really good method for at-home unblocking of the nose, and it's just Buteyko, I think it's Buteyko, and just look up unblocked nose. There's a guy by the name of Patrick McEwen who has a nice video on it, and he also has a book, The Oxygen Advantage, which can be really helpful. Teaches you ways to naturally open your nose. It's free. You can do it at home. You can do it while you're walking, while you're sitting. And it's something that allows you to get the nose open so we can drain a lot of these infections. And if we do treatments in the nose, get them up there better. Microglia are really important to me because they're part of the innate immune response, part of your immune system that's supposed to protect the brain. And if there's an injury, they work right away, and they also generate these reactive oxygen species. So sometimes you'll hear about the use of synapsin, which is a ginseng extract and some B vitamin extracts that we shoot in the nose. And that actually can help bring down inflammation in the brain, and you can get that through a compounding pharmacist if your doctor prescribes it. So that's a nice free radical scavenger and can be used when people have brain inflammation. But the problem with the microglia is either in PANS or just if we have other infections is this kind of chronic inflammation. Because again, we get breakdown of the blood-brain barrier when this happens, and it's been associated with a lot of neurodegenerative issues. And then we see, hey, Bartonella henselae has actually been found in the microglia. So the same again, if we head back here, those same microglia that are getting broken down by your immune system in response to group A strep are also being attacked. Sorry, I'm going the wrong direction. They're also being attacked by Bartonella henselae. These are the immune cells of the brain that are supposed to protect you from Bartonella, and Bartonella is going and living in them. So that's kind of a scary thing. And now we look at PANS, and we see Bartonella has actually been tied to people with PANS, and this is the case study from Dr. Breitschwartz's group, and my buddies Bob Mosiani and Alan Lewis are working with this patient. A young 14-year-old guy who 18 months, he was in the hospital 4 times. He had all these therapeutic trials of psychiatric medications, immunosuppressants for autoimmune encephalitis. They said, maybe he has neurobartonellosis because he had cutaneous lesions, those violaceous purple stretch marks. And then, they gave him doxycycline for a couple of months because they're like, that's the right treatment. And then they were still able to find Bartonella via PCR and by finding the DNA, but they said he wasn't any better because we know that a single antibiotic or a single herb is not what Bartonella needs. It usually needs a multi-pronged approach. And so once they were able to isolate Bartonella for sure, they did do a multi-faceted antibiotic approach with some supportive therapies, and gradually this patient's neuropsychiatric symptoms went away. He got off of all his psychiatric drugs. They had resolution of these Bartonella cutaneous lesions, and then, he was able to go back to his pre-illness life, which is just absolutely amazing. And it was by getting the right diagnosis. And I would also suggest that what we need to do is understand this as a possibility, but also know that there are other things we can do, like working on our gut and brain detoxification routes to help support this. So how does this all really go into everyday life, right? Because this is really the critical piece to me, is not all the mumbo jumbo we've been talking about, but what is real life like? Because having Lyme, having Bartonella, having, PANS, having a child with PANS, it's very isolating. You feel like, it's just you and you're stuck there. So what can inform other things that we can do at home? Because we're working with great doctors, hopefully. We're getting all the treatments. What other things can we work on? And so Dr. Porges wrote this book, The Polyvagal Theory. It's super cool because he talks about the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous systems, which are the common things that doctors and other health providers talk about with the autonomic or automatic nervous system, right? So the fight or flight is our sympathetics, and our social engagement, relax, rejuvenate, heal, enjoy food, have friends. That's social engagement. And typically that's what therapists think about. That's what doctors think about, is like these two are imbalanced, one to the other, one or the other, and they go back and forth. But what about if there is another? So right here, fight or flight, right? I can win, social engagement, things are super great. But what if you can't win? What if you got stuck? What if the cat grabbed you, right, and you're the mouse? What is the only chance you have to survive after you've already been caught? It's to play dead, right? It's to freeze. And so there's another part of this nervous system that we don't usually talk about, that Dr. Porges brought out, really to the forefront, is there's this freeze state. So he talks about a ventral and a dorsal vagal state, where you have the dorsal vagus is this freeze part, and the ventral vagus is this social engagement. Fancy words for us all to know, but just know that you can win or you can't win, and that's those top two parts, and those are critical to think about. So a little more anatomy, but the important part here is that what we see is the brainstem highlighted on the right, and that's the vagus nerve coming out of it. And then it comes out at the base of the neck, way up in the top and the back. But then as it drops down, you're going to see some of it goes to the throat. There's one in the middle here that actually goes directly to the palate. We go to the vocal cords by looping under the aorta here, and we go all the way back up. So some of our throat muscles and our vocal cords are controlled by the vagus nerve, which is directly impacted by our physiologic state. So how many people with Lyme disease or Bartonella or PANS or Babesia, mycotoxins, who are having issues in their throat area, right? I mean, there's so much from swallowing issues to changes in their voice to kind of coughing and gagging, tongue control. All these things can play a role through this. Now, the other part that's really critical to understand is that this vagus nerve is coming down and not only looping back up towards the thyroid and the vocal cords and the rest of the throat, but you see it's going directly to the heart. And the heart is, this is the one center that we haven't really talked about yet. And if we follow it down even further, you can get a picture of the vagus coming through the back of the neck, going down the neck, going to the heart, to the lungs, and even down to almost the entire gastrointestinal system, to almost the end of the entire large intestine. So it's going to the liver here on the left, right under the diaphragm. It's going to the stomach and the pancreas, which isn't shown here. It's going to all those places. Sorry, I hit the button getting excited here. And so what we find from the polyvagal system is that vagus nerve needs to be in balance, right? So when we have the fight or flight, people, they're mad, they can fight, but if they're frozen, like so many of my patients, we see they feel hopeless, they feel numb, very shut down. And what happens, you'll see on the top right there, our endorphins go up to numb our pain, which also very commonly will numb our desires to talk to other people. We won't really have that emotional response that makes us feel alive. We start to put our eyes down. We divert from people. We lose facial expression. And all of that just pulls us out of being a social creature. And unfortunately, that leads us to having depressed immune function. We certainly see if we stay in this fight or flight, maybe you're somebody who still feels like you can really do it. You can still win. The problem with that is you're very sympathetic, your heart rates are really high with your blood pressure, your gut function goes way down, Because if you're running away from a saber-toothed tiger, you don't want to be digesting or pooping, right? You want to have all of your blood out to your organs, but that's not good function of your gut, because then you can't really think. You're just doing like, am I going to die or not? And again, that sympathetic part, we see the depressed immune function. And if we go down to the bottom here, we see that social engagement, or this parasympathetic state, is really good because we feel great. We're open and curious. We're investigating the world. We might feel grounded and present in the moment. We're together with our family. We're enjoying our time together. We're feeling connected. We have friends that we're going out with. And, it's nice to have online support, and it brings a lot of us together, but it certainly doesn't always help. Like right now, it's kind of a weird feeling. It's like, I'm super excited to share all this, but the problem is I'm not having any direct talking at the moment. And a lot of you who know me, I love that. So talking to a screen is not really for me as much fun as sitting in a room with all of you. And so I'm super stoked that we get to do this via Facebook, because otherwise we might not be able to do it. But this is a piece that is also really, we need to have that direct connection, because when we do, on the right, we see immune function goes up, gut function goes up, resistance to infection goes up, and our defenses go down, and we get to relate to other people. So the thing is, the areas of our brain that allow us to understand facial expressivity, the intonation of somebody's voice, the excitement they have or the withdrawal, and all the little gestures they make with their hands or their body, those are all impacted by those same areas that Lyme is impacting here. So that's kind of concerning, because we can see how people can get stuck in that freeze state of that dorsal vagal state, because Lyme and Bartonella and other things are affecting these particular areas in the brain. So something to think about. The good news is, in Bransfield and Dance's work, they have actually shown that this is reversible, and certainly in my experience, for many people it is. But we can see that the pathogens are directly impacting parts of our brain that have to do with memory. Our gut is impacting parts of the brain that have to do with memory. And then these areas that are being impacted pull us away from being able to actually interact with people socially. And that's kind of so it's just like one thing compounds on the other. So we really need to step in, because if we can't, the fact that we can't read these cues tells the doctors that we're going to see and tell about our symptoms a lot of clues about your physiologic state and the different places to look. And for all of us, if we can't realize we're safe, there's no way we can heal. So the vagus nerve, that joy, that compassion, the groundedness, being open, has a lot to do with being and feeling safe. So this is a problem, because you may not be able to experience that sense of safety without being able to actually, while you're having these infections. So some people are going to have a struggle with this, but we always should be working a little, and take out any of the other factors so that we can really see what's infection and what's not. And so some of the things that we can look at for changing up some of the factors that would be external to Lyme and other things would be things like heart rate variability. Probably should take a sip. So heart rate variability is an interesting thing, and it is what it sounds like. The heart rate should change with breathing, with things we do, but it should change in a smooth manner. And if that's not happening, that's a sign of decreased heart rate variability, but it's a sign of chronic stress, of inflammation, of poor health outcomes. So what this group here is really cool. They did this thing. They said, hey, you can modulate your heart rate variability through breathing. And the question is, they said, well, a lot of people with Lyme disease, they have orthostatic palpitations, syncope, which is like passing out. They have a lot of stress. They often will have, POTS, the postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, fatigue and cognitive dysfunction, all this stuff that we've been talking about, and some of the other things that we all know are associated with tick-borne illnesses. They're like, hey, I bet if we go and we study them, they're going to not be able to modulate their heart rate variability with their breathing as well as somebody else. And lo and behold, that's what they found when they did 18 controls versus 18 Lyme patients. And so we do know that Lyme will actually interfere with the vagus nerve very directly. And in here, they feel that it was that Lyme disease, their results suggested that Lyme disease will directly impact the vagus nerve and or the brainstem. So this whole pathway we're talking about, and how we're talking about how the gut can help it and how we can help it, we can sleep better to fix all of this. These infections may indeed actually directly negatively impact these. So these are another things to be aware of. The good news is you and your children can do a ton about this. So what we see on the left of the screen is from, or all of this is from HeartMath, and this is just a biofeedback group that it's a little technology that allows you to get from a state of poor heart rate variability that you see in the middle on the left there, and respiration all over, blood pressure all over, into a state of what they call coherence, which is kind of it's a nice catchphrase, but what they're saying is we're getting our autonomic nervous system back in check. And we can use our breathing to help modulate our heart rate variability and help modulate other autonomic functions. Because breathing is really kind of a cool thing, right? We can control our breathing, but we also can't control it, right? Like we'll breathe all night while we're sleeping, but when we're awake, we usually don't think of breathing, but sometimes we can. And we can help ourselves to either breathe faster or slower when necessary, with both automatically as well as under malicious thought. So this is a really cool thing. And in these support materials that I'm gonna send to you guys, or if you sign, I'll give you access to them in just a minute here. Those things, I'll tell you how to get this and a little bit more about it. But we can really, just through simple breathing exercises, work on getting our heart rate variability under control, so that maybe Lyme is impacting it a little, but we can take better control over our baseline state and build a great foundation. The other part here is gratitude. We really want to be looking into the heart and just being thankful. Wake up in the morning and be super thankful. I'm looking over here. I see a whole bunch of you have made time to be here with me and allow me to share my passion and give you some of this background information. And be here for your friends and your kids. So many people who are signed up as part of our group are here for friends, right? Or they're like my children. And I'm just so grateful to be able to share with you. And I'm sure you're very grateful for your children and your friends and everything. And sometimes we forget that when it's a tough day. And if we just take a small moment in the morning and a small moment in the evening to find one thing and just feel the emotion of that goodness, even if it's I'm alive and that's it. The rest of it sucks, but I'm here breathing. And then breathe into that. That can be really helpful. The other thing is I'm going to give you some resources from Stanley Rosenberg. He's got Accessing the Healing Power of the Vagus Nerve, and he has a whole book on this polyvagal theory and how to do exercises at home that will help you release the area around the neck, in the neck and around the vagus nerve, to reconnect the heart and the gut to the brain. So there's a couple exercises out of the book that I find are super important, and they can be very helpful with very little effort, even if you're feeling really poorly. Then that's something that you'll be able to grab from there. Or you can go grab the whole book. It's spectacular. It's got a lot of great pictures, so check that out. The other thing that is in the support materials is, and it's a thing I call relax and reboot. It's just some simple things we can do at home to really put this stuff to work right away, rather than waiting for all the science to catch up to the suffering we're having. Dr. Fulford is an osteopath who is just spectacular. I mean, he took time to investigate his own body, investigate a lot of teachings, find out how the body works and how he could support it naturally at home. So I highly recommend his book, Touch of Life. It's got cool exercises at the end. He talks about everything from osteopathic treatment to vibration to love in his book. I mean, we took quotes, Jill and I took quotes out of his book and read it directly at our wedding, because it was so potent, and this is really, it kind of captures a lot of who we are as people. And so my daughter Talia decided to model one of his exercises that's not in this book. And again, you'll be able to get access to that. I'll give it to you in just a second here. And that's just, it's so easy to do. You can do it lying down. So, and it's just spectacular. And Dr. Fulford really understood that, he said, if you're not breathing through your nose, you're only half alive. This back in the 70s and 80s, he knew that if you were breathing through your nose, you were able to drain your brain better and bring life back to your brain, and also reconnect your brain to your heart and to your gut. So great reading, and I'll give you a great resource from him demonstrated in that. So I wanted to just say thanks. This is kind of one of those things where I really want to go change. I love talking about the brain and all its anatomy and the physiology, as I'm sure you know. And I thought that the best thing to do is to get this out there and let you guys see it sort of in its raw form. And I'm going to continue to be tweaking it so that it's more and more sort of user friendly, if you will. But I think it's so important to understand that so many of us doctors spend all of our time learning these parts, so that when we get new information from all different sources, we're able to apply these for you as quickly as possible and for your children, in real time, because this is the background. This is the level of understanding that it takes to know all these pieces. And so while I can't tell you one thing's better or worse for you just over Facebook, these are some simple tips that you can use at home, things we talked about tonight. You can even just start looking at diet and taking out processed foods. That's going to make a big difference. So anybody interested in getting Relax and Reboot, which summarizes some of the things that we just talked about, gives you exercises. And by exercises, I mean like chill exercise that you can do laying in your bed, some standing up if you really wanted to. You can go to originsofhealth.com/thankyou-gifts, and I'll send that over to you. Also, over the next 3 days, if you do that, I'll send you a thing I call Common Reasons Treatment Fails and How to Avoid Them. And that's got a whole bunch of things, just food for thought. If you see any good ideas, let me know. Anything that you want to add in there, let me know. This is an evolving document. It's just some things that have really just, they piqued my interest, and I've seen over the last decade plus of doing this that I think could be really helpful for you and your children. And then I also have my top 5 brain detox tips. They're super fun. So these are just going to be 3 PDFs that are free to you as a thank you for letting me do this. I mean, it's been a great pleasure. And as I said, one of the most important things here is having gratitude. And I'm so grateful to everyone for this opportunity to do this and to just kind of spout off some of the information I think is really useful to know. I don't expect you to, there's no test tomorrow, but hopefully if you take home, just be a little bit more grateful tomorrow than you were today. And if you're a super grateful person, just be grateful for one more thing the next day. I mean, it's just so much fun to do this. And I work with this. My wife and I work on gratitude. Our friends do this. We do it with our daughter. And really kind of dive into being grateful with your kids. And really welcome to being successful, because for me, this last year has been so amazing with all the support of everybody in this group. We're making so many changes that you're all going to see more and more of over the next several months. And to me, success is getting the message out, changing children's lives one at a time, then 10 at a time, and then 100 and 1,000 at a time. We want to get the information out, but we also want to remember to enjoy the journey. I was talking to a friend of mine, and she said, make sure you give them big wins. And I was like, I work with people with Lyme, Bartonella, mycotoxin, PANS, autism. What do you mean big wins? I mean, some of my folks, they can't even get out of a wheelchair, right? And some of them are lucky they woke up in the morning or they remember their kid's name. I mean, and that's horrible to think about. And thankfully not everybody's that sick, but a lot of folks are having a hard time. And so through our conversation and my frustration with her statement, big win, a few things started coming into my life. And what I realized is it's the summation of a bunch of little wins, which is progress. So tonight before I go to bed, I'm going to be grateful for one more thing, right? I'm going to think of one thing to be grateful for. And then tomorrow I'm going to wake up and be grateful for something. And I'm going to remember that I'm breathing. And maybe instead of having, 2 servings of ice cream for dessert, I'm going to have 1. Little things add up. Sometimes just, some people are trying to start exercising and they get to press 2 tomato soup cans over their head, and that's a good thing. So enjoy the journey, because that's where all the really great stuff happens. And so I'm really enjoying the journey, and I appreciate everybody being here. So thank you so much. And I think what we're going to try to do is get rid of this crazy thing. And find some of our questions, because I was rolling through that like a million miles an hour. Hopefully Elena will get some through here for me. But we can scroll back. And thank you for all the thank yous. This is super fun, and I hope it's something that everybody finds helpful. Let's see. Yeah, Rob is saying, diet's been a huge part in helping his healing. And thank you too, Rob, for all you do. I know so many of you guys on here are not only, getting yourself better, you're getting other people better. One of the things about diet is find the diet that's right for you. Everybody's like, do I need paleo? Do I need keto? Do I need this or that? Some people have very specific dietary needs. There's no doubt about that. But a lot of people, we try really hard and we make it too hard. So again, it's the journey. So keep working in that direction, and you'll see a lot of that stuff, can go on. Ooh, I saw a good one here while I'm waiting for the other ones to come through. Can Bartonella be passed in pregnancy? There are actually studies that show that Bartonella, again, it's small. I mean, it's a case report, so 2 people. But there are 2 children that were confirmed to get Bartonella from their mom, and that is something that I would expect would probably continue. The more, time goes by, we're going to see more of that stuff. I'm going to try to see if I can get some more. There we go. Some Facebook questions. Oh, I got that one. Thanks, Elena. My thing says there's a bunch of comments. I don't know if they're just thank yous. It's not letting me read them. But if you have questions, pop them in there. It looks like they'll be coming up for me now. And wow, that's 25 folks that are still sticking in there after all of that. It's really, thanks from Paul from San Diego. So happy that you're very welcome. I was just actually in San Diego this past weekend. And this is actually something I wanted to talk about. So maybe Paul doesn't have a question, but he made me remember. We were, a lot of people probably know Wayne Dyer from Personal Development. And we were at the Mindshare Collaborative Summit this weekend, where a bunch of health entrepreneurs come together to find out better ways to get their message out and to help more people. There's marketing tools and email things and funnels and all this stuff. Half of the crap I don't even understand what it means, because I just want to help people. And, I'm lucky I can use email and the Facebook thing. But, the core of the whole event was be yourself. And Mary Morrissey came on the last day. And Mary Morrissey is a student of Wayne Dyer's, and she's also run World Peace Summits 3 different times for the Dalai Lama. And she is just like all about building dreams. And if you've watched some of our previous Facebooks, Darren Engels and I have talked a lot about the mindset of overcoming chronic Lyme and other infections. And one of the questions that just popped up is, can some children fight Lyme infections on their own? And certainly there are people who get Lyme. It's either not as difficult of a situation, not a virulent strain, or maybe their immune system's in a great place and it reacts really well to the Lyme and knocks it out. That certainly happens. And what we noticed, though, is that different people are in different places, right? I mean, so as someone who worked in a hospital, I've had people come in with pneumonia, and you would expect them to walk out and go home, and they end up dying a couple days later. And people who are sicker than snot with their pneumonia, they should be dead by all rights and all medical understanding, and they go home. And there's all kinds of less dramatic versions of that story, but what really happens is you have your unique makeup, and then it depends on what challenge gets you. And you'll see that a lot of people will be like, maybe they're living in mold, right? But it doesn't bother them. And or better yet, I'll take my own example. I had a lot of mercury fillings, and my grades were great. My brain worked fantastic. I got Lyme. My brain never worked well again, even after I got rid of the Lyme. Until then, I also removed the heavy metals. So the heavy metals didn't seem to bother my body, but the Lyme broke my body and then allowed the heavy metals to be a problem. And so I didn't need to continue to focus just on Lyme, is because those symptoms really seemed to be gone, except this brain thing, but it was sticking around when all the other Lyme symptoms were gone. So I needed to focus on the metals. And what's really interesting to me is everybody's got a unique background, unique genetics. We can't always change all those things, but we can do things like, before we get sick, let's work on being healthier. Let's do things like, get our diet a little bit more on the high vegetable and less processed food side. And then, if our kids feel like they really need to, if the kids really feel like, I'm sorry, I'm getting totally distracted by some of the questions because they're so awesome. If our kids want to have some gluten or they want to have a dessert, depending upon how sick they are, maybe we can give them a little slack. Sometimes we don't have that luxury, but sometimes we can. But going back to Mary Morrissey, she's like, look, if you don't plan where you're going to be in a year, you're never going to get there. So and this is a lot of advice, that I've given before, but I just love the way she puts it. And she's worked with the Dalai Lama on world peace, and I have not, so certainly she's an authority. But if you say, where am I going to be in August 2020? What does that really look like? What's your dream? Not like I'm going to have, if you want to be over Lyme and over PANS or whatever, don't be like, hey, I beat this stuff. Be like, what does it truly look like? What does health look like? And why? Like, what is the reason? So what do you love about being better from Lyme? What are you going to be able to do? What are you going to feel like? And then start living that way. And so I understand that we can't just love away our infections. I mean, if you can and you figure that one out, please come teach me. I know you can do it. I just haven't figured out how to do it. But what I mean is, we can boost our immune function. We can improve our gut. We can improve the function of our vagus and our brain detox, improve the quality of our sleep by having that positive emotional thing. So maybe I'm in a wheelchair and I'm not feeling so hot. I have terrible pain and my head hurts. But then from these infections, I say, okay, one of my dreams is to be out of the wheelchair and to be over the Lyme. Well, rather than using those words, what are you going to be able to accomplish then? What love of your life, what passion of your life are you going to be doing? And then focus on that, because you can feel that now. And then just keep adding to that. It's like the gratitude, a little bit at a time. And in a year, we'll see how we get there. But what I do know is if we know that we're not going to get better from Lyme, that's 100% true, except in very rare circumstances. And if you give yourself a dream at your body, don't worry about how you're going to get there. Just have that dream and then take consistent action every day. Even if it's those really small little steps that add up to a big win, then you at least have a half a chance of getting there. Let's see. Oh my goodness. Breakfast tips. Breakfast is tricky. It depends. Some people I know really feel like they have to have breakfast and they love breakfast. I don't really need breakfast, but I love breakfast food. And it kind of depends on if you have food allergies or not. I do a lot of smoothies, and in the next couple of months, I'm going to start putting out some of my smoothie recipes. I find I use a beef bone broth protein base that we have that we had formulated for our office. So I get the benefits of the beef bone broth, but I don't have to taste it because it's chocolate or vanilla. But I do love smoothies because then I can do, like, say, a chocolate or vanilla smoothie with some berries, so I get that low glycemic index. And I get organic, so as best I can, I get the glyphosate stuff, not as one of my issues, and other toxins. And then I'll add in things like chia seeds, because chia will actually help you absorb water better, so you get more hydrated. And I use things for minerals like cacao nibs, and what's the other thing that goes in there? Oh, and sometimes some nut butters, because I can tolerate nuts, and that gives me a little more protein and flavor. And you can, the other part, you can hide your greens in there, right? So you can start out with something simple like spinach, which is super easy to hide. And if you want over time, add things like kale or even frozen broccoli into that. And that can be a helpful way to go. There's also a lot of really good recipes for things like chia pudding made with coconut milk, where you can put that in, in the fridge overnight and then bring that out and you have like a chia seed, pudding type of thing, and you can put some berries on it in the morning. I have some friends who've done some pretty cool recipe books, and over the next couple of days, I'll see if I can grab some of the recipes and drop them in for folks. Breakfast is kind of hard, especially if you're kind of rushing. So that'll be something, I'll try to take notes on that one and get that over to you guys. And then, Let's see. Brain lesions go away if they're caused by Lyme. It kind of depends on what brain lesion we're talking about. Some people get brain lesions that are similar to multiple sclerosis or MS because the tail of that spirochete is very similarly genetically to the myelin sheath, and myelin is sort of the insulation that goes around your nerve. It's almost like a copper wire and has the insulation, and if we scratch that off, that messes stuff up and it shorts out, and that's what happens in MS. I have seen people typically with atypical multiple sclerosis and brain lesions that will resolve with effective treatment. There are other types of brain lesions, a lot that may or may not change. The thing we see most commonly in Lyme and Bartonella is not so much lesions, I mean, aside from the ones we just talked about, but we're going to see more functional changes. So SPECT scans, functional MRI, going back to those pictures I showed earlier, those are going to be the things that change. So not so much physical change, although there are, if you look at certain MRIs, they'll say this could be consistent with Lyme, right? And so there are little white matter changes. But really, to me, the most important part is it's functional. And as you see, the more you look at these things, it doesn't really matter if a part is broken if the body's figured out a different way to get the same thing done. Now, I don't want that part broken, but it's just kind of like if you have a positive Lyme test and despite 3 years of treatment, but now you're symptom free for 6 months, but your blood test is still positive for an antibody. What's more important? It's the function. So Lyme and BART really do, and even mycotoxins can cause a lot of functional changes, and those are definitely things that can be reversed. Now, again, like anything else, we can't promise and guarantee everybody's reversible, but those are much more commonly reversed. Like those pictures I was showing of the brain, those resolve in the studies, which is really promising. And I'm going to go back here and look for Elena's other questions because my comment section is losing stuff. Let's see. Oops. Oh no, I have an email sorter to help kind of keep my inbox a little better, and they're sorting Elena to a different folder. So Gabriella asked if the video is going to go outside of the group. Eventually, we probably will post this up to YouTube like we usually do. This is something that, as much as I want to keep it, private just to us, just because I want to do it as a thank you to everybody here, I think it's important to get this information out. So that will be happening at some point. All right, we got that one. What else do we got here? Can you address vision changing and why Lyme attacks visual area and extraocular muscles? Wow, I should pull up some cool anatomy slides. So Lyme is well known to affect different cranial nerves. Probably the most commonly known one is if you get a Bell's palsy, meaning, the facial nerve gets affected and you have a droop on one side. I know there's even people on tonight who have had this issue occur. So that's Lyme can directly impact the nerves, and ocular muscles are one of the more common ones. And what we'll see is you'll see a lot of us will be testing for tracking, whether my eyes can follow when we go up and we go down to see if the eyes will follow or if they'll smoothly or if they sort of skip. The other thing is we look for convergence, and convergence is a question of, can my pupils line up on one point so I see one? Because if I'm asking you to focus on one point with your eyes and then at one point your eyes don't line up on that point, you see double. Or what's really common in kids who are at school is they're going like, it's almost like they're bench pressing, to hold it all day, and then their head hurts, and now they don't pay attention. And the teacher's like, oh, they have ADHD or they're a bad kid. And I'm like, no, their eyes don't focus properly. But the problem is, if I do the tracking and I look for extraocular muscle movements, the eyes might move completely fine this way and this way, but if I ask them to move in, one doesn't, or it just floats out. So that tells me, going like this, the muscles are working, the control over the muscle is not working as well. The nerve might be damaged, or part of the brain might be inflamed, and that could be something from Lyme. And so a lot of times when our kids aren't behaving, it's because they can't focus because they literally physically can't do it. You go to the standard eye doctor, if they're not looking at convergence, a lot of times what you're going to end up seeing is they have 20/20 vision, they're fine. And now you have a behavioral problem. But if you go to someone who looks at their eyes like a behavioral optometrist or a behavioral ophthalmologist, the different kinds of eye doctors who actually are looking at that, or maybe someone like myself or Dr. Jones, we're going to find that there's a control of the eye issue. So it's a visual spatial processing issue. It's happening behind the eye with the control over the eye, but the nerve going to the actual ocular muscles may be working. You could also have an ocular muscle issue as well from Lyme. The other thing is sometimes you'll even see kids can accommodate. That's called accommodation, so it comes in and they can kind of almost do it. But if you ask them to read, and if your kid's having a hard time reading or difficulty at school, ask them to read and then kind of look right in their pupils, right? And those little black dots. And sometimes what you'll see is that their pupils will go like this. So you're having a spasm of accommodation. They're trying to focus, but you'll actually see that flicker. And that's a muscular movement within the eye. But that's if they're doing that every time they're trying to focus on something, that's going to be really difficult for them to maintain. Now, all of these things we just talked about in the eye don't necessarily mean this is Lyme, right? Can be in Lyme, can be in Bartonella. The other thing, though, is head injury does this very commonly, and many of you know this. My daughter whacked her head pretty good earlier this year, and she has the spasm of accommodation, but doing the different things for head injuries that you do, including like hyperbaric treatments, those are things that have led to the resolution of that spasm of accommodation. So Lyme can mess with the eyes, kind of directly. Lyme can screw with the nerves, and then Lyme can also screw with the control back in the occipital lobe and other parts of the brain. Now the other part, Bartonella, can mess with the eyes in whole different ways. Dr. Padula, who's a neurooptometrist who works down in Guilford, Connecticut, and I do a lot of work with, had me go speak at a national ophthalmologic convention on co-infections and what they do to the eye. And I pretty much spent the whole time on Bartonella, from ulcerations of the eye to neuroretinitis to causing blind spots to all kinds of other things. So not to belabor it, but yes, Lyme and Bartonella can mess with your eyes quite a bit. But also eye changes are often from other things too. And, as an example, and someone whose eyes are aging, even in their 30s and 40s, can also get Bartonella. So now we can have two things. So we always have to think about all the potential factors in there. Let's see. I saw another one pop up here. Nice. All right, Michelle. Great to see you on. Thanks for the question about disulfiram. And some of the results. Oh, it's popping up. No. I love it. It's like I can sort of see and it goes away. But disulfiram, actually, I'm going to be talking with Dr. Ligner soon about this. We want to do an event so that we can really get this information directly out to you guys. From my experience, the research, we call it bench research. So in the science lab research that got this going sounds really interesting. And I've started a couple patients on it at their request, and we're going to see how it goes. My understanding is not only has Dr. Ligner published those, I think it was 3 people in the case report, but there's actually going to be an actual scientific drug-style study on this, so we can get some really good data. So there should be a lot more to come from that. Let's see. Yeah, ocular migraines after Lyme. That's a pretty common thing. And again, like I was saying, part of the issue is it multifactorial? Is it because something's messing with your eyes, the muscles of the eyes, the nerves of the eyes, the control of the eyes? Or do you have some sort of, like a lot of times I was talking to somebody about, I think we were talking in the group about neck pain. You can have a little bit of arthritis, which is pretty normal. Now, a lot of arthritis is usually not normal, but a lot of people have it. But people without arthritis don't necessarily have to have any issues, right? They don't have to have pain. But then we get this body-wide inflammation from Lyme, BART, all the other things we've been talking about. And that can literally trigger pain in one area. So you could also have ocular migraines from a little bit of eye strain that never bothered you. You get Lyme that leads to a lot of inflammation, especially in the head, and you can run into that issue. Oh, good. Michelle's signing up for the Columbia study based on Ken's stuff. So hopefully we'll get a lot of really good information from that. And look forward to Ken Ligner and I are figuring out the best way to deliver some of this information, but I'm really excited. And Dr. Horowitz is going to be updating us on Dapsone pretty soon too. So there's a lot of really cool stuff that's coming out. And Heather, the pineal cysts, if they're tick-borne or not, or Bartonella related, to my knowledge, pineal cysts are unrelated. Now, we could interfere with the function of the pineal gland through a lot of the mechanisms we talked about tonight and potentially directly, but the cysts in a pineal gland or anywhere else in the body for that matter are really typically not directly related. We use the term cyst for the round body form of the Lyme spirochete, the bacteria that causes Lyme. It's technically not a cyst. Round body is more a better term scientifically. But since we all use cyst, we can continue to use it, and that's fine. But those are microscopic things, and I'm not sure if that's where you're going, but I think it's an important point, is these are microscopic. We need electron microscopes to see this. These are not things that you can see on an MRI. We're not causing like big cysts that you can find on your arm. Some of the nodules people get on their bodies, people talk about potentially being related with Bartonella. Those would be induced by Bartonella, but not like a hot spot of Bartonella, right? We do have lymphocytomas, especially you get them on the ear, that can happen in Lyme. I think it happens more commonly in Europe, but those lymphocytomas are actually lymphocytes or types of white blood cells that end up getting pulled in one area, induced by Lyme, but not necessarily Lyme. So these are not, cysts are not really sort of visible conglomerations of spirochetes. It's more like that electron microscope thing. And with the biofilms, those things are again, we need fancy scientific equipment to see them, but those are more physical because they're bigger sort of conglomerations of these bacteria, especially Lyme. But again, these aren't things that we're going to be, at least at the moment that we know we're going to be seeing. There's some work where they thought that biofilm from another organism might be part of what we see in the plaques in coronary artery disease. So when we have plugs, when the heart gets plugged up, but that research is really more speculative than anything. So we'll have to wait to see, what else is going on there. What about Lyme and word finding? How's it going, Bill? Good to see you. I can't remember what I was going to say. No, just kidding. I remember it. The part of my story I didn't tell you was when I had my acute Lyme, I went back to my house and a friend of mine had asked me to call them and let them know what was going on because I decided to drive to see my parents and their doctor. And this is back in the rotary phone days where we wrote the phone number right in front of us. And I was on the phone and I told them how bad I was feeling and I was really stumbling over words and having a hard time. And they literally said, okay, well, I want to call you. What day are you coming home? I told them, they're like, I want to call you to make sure you're okay. What's your phone number? And I'm literally standing in front of the phone staring at my number, and I didn't know my number. And they're like, you're standing in front of it. And I was like, oh. So, and certainly word finding is a huge issue in Lyme disease. And it's probably inflammation affecting the parts of the brain that are retrieving, right? So the prefrontal cortex is helping that hippocampus retrieve that information from there. And now, see, one of the things that happens is we start to see a little word finding problem, and then we get nervous about it, and we feel bad, and we start to get into that kind of like social withdrawal state. But we also, one of the things we didn't talk about yet really is that gut reaction that we have, that's real. Biochemically, your brain processes that just as it would pain. And so this is going to change your brain. So now I'm having a hard time from Lyme finding words, but now I'm starting to get sort of like anxious socially, and I'm feeling kind of like, oh my God, everybody is noticing this. And the problem that happens with that then is you start to have an emotional reaction, which then feeds back to the brain, which actually could potentially make that worse, which is why going back to like Mary Morrissey's work and the work of my friend like Joan Rosenberg and the work of like me, someday everyone will know me from Mindset too, is we need to be focusing on taking the right actions to get us to our dream, to get us to our goal. So that, and when we empower ourselves to look at that goal, we will take those right actions to get the job done today to reach that. So it's not that we're not doing the work and we're not focusing on it, but if we can always go back to that gratitude and always go back to that mission, what are we doing this for? That's going to help us to short circuit some of that sort of the extra part of the word finding issues that might be on top of the Lyme. And that's really one of the big problems with these tick-borne illnesses is they add more and more and more on top of them. And I often will call Lyme the great instigator, instead of the next great imitator. Because, it'll imitate chronic fatigue, it'll imitate, thyroid problems, it'll imitate gut issues and Crohn's, it might imitate multiple sclerosis. But the problem is it initiates a cascade of events in your body where you end up in these positive feedback loops where, problems with brain function, dysfunction lead to more brain problems, lead to more brain problems, lead to more brain problems, even in the absence of the original Lyme. So that's where when we're looking at treatment, we need to treat the underlying infection. We got to turn off that inflammation, and we got to stop these cycles, this autoimmunity and these other feed-forward loops like pain cycles and cognitive dysfunction cycles and sleep dysregulation. We have to work on those directly in addition to Lyme to pull all that stuff kind of back together. What's up, Darren? Good to see you there, man. And so Heather was just commenting on the pineal cyst that went away after the Lyme and Bartonella treatment. It's certainly possible. We see a lot of things get better. So my question as a scientist would be, this is great to learn a lot more information about. But then also what I want to learn is, was it that she just improved the overall function of her body and did other things that allowed her body to heal that pineal cyst? Or if someone had gone into the cyst and actually sucked some fluid out or whatever was in that, would there have been bacteria in there? And we don't, maybe Heather, I don't know the answer to that one because I don't know the person. But I will say, I studied a lot with Ray Jones, right? Charles Ray Jones. And we would often talk, and he would get questions all the time with kids who had brain tumors. And they would go in, and sometimes they needed to have a surgical procedure to remove pieces and stuff. And they would often do sampling for Lyme, Bartonella, Babesia. And he was like, he would find it frequently. And they would all be like, oh, Lyme caused the brain tumor. And he was like, no, 100% no. What happened was there was an area of the body that was weakened, and Lyme and Bartonella moved in because they're opportunistic. And so in that particular, and he has a background in oncology too. So I mean, I trust his judgment because he knows a lot more about that particular aspect of it than I do. And that's another thing. So as a scientist, I have to say, let's see, I need to categorize this case report of this pineal cyst getting better because I want to know that. But then I also want to look back and see, could that be other things? Because I've seen people who you're treating them for their Lyme and all their plantar warts go away. Or other problems they've had forever, like completely change. And was it that we gave them, antimicrobials for Lyme? Or was it because as part of that, we helped their sleep, we got their diet together, we turned off their Wi-Fi before they went to bed, and we brought down their body-wide inflammation. We implemented a mindfulness practice so that they could de-stress and things of that nature. So this is like super to hear. I love Dr. Jones too, Michelle. If there's anybody out there who's done an amazing thing for the world, it's him. I mean, he is still practicing. It's one of these things that like just blow my mind. I mean, talk about a mission. If you want to inspire yourself or your children to do the things I'm suggesting with have a dream, feel the love of that dream, know what you're going to do when you achieve that dream in 1 year so that you can start feeling that right now. Look at Ray Jones, right? Ray is still practicing because he loves helping children. I've tried to get him to do other things so that we can kind of like basically suck his brain out and document it in a very official way. He can't do it. His passion is helping kids one-on-one, right? He lives for that interaction and feeling the love of that child and giving that love to that child. That's why he can still practice despite all the bullshit he's gone through, all the crap everyone's put him through, And then he's gotten so many people behind him because he's a warrior and he's on a mission, and he's just, what an inspiration to say, if he can do it, I can do it too. He's gotten through so much adversity because he found the thing and he feels the love of that, right? And that thing for him is this one-on-one helping the children, and it's just, oh my God, how amazing. So certainly something, Dr. Jones is freaking incredible. There's a question about neuroquant MRI showing Lyme and co-infections. The work on neuroquants has been done, to my knowledge, at least in this, applying it to this field, has been done by Dr. Shoemaker, looking at maybe Lyme-induced, maybe mold-induced issues. The problem is his definition of Lyme is often different than other people's definition of Lyme, so I'm not sure where he's really pulling that from. But what I do know is that when in his research we're looking at changes in the brain that make it likely that there's a toxin or an infection, mold or Lyme, and I would assume that Lyme co-infections could be included in there, but that's not how I've seen it presented, that are making changes in key areas of the brain that are different than other people. And we can see with appropriate treatment that changes. So whether or not the neuroquant is ever going to be used specifically for the diagnosis there, it's certainly a place to look. One of the things that we're actually going to be doing in our office pretty soon is we're going to be looking at a thing called neurotracks, or I think they call it brain care now. And this is going to be, instead of doing a big blown out, several $1,000 neuropsychiatric test, we can do a computerized test that takes 45 to 60 minutes and see the different parts of function. Because for me, I really want to know how you feel and how you're able to get through your life. And I also need to know all this other stuff, like what the MRI looks like. But more importantly to me, and more importantly to you for your daily life at least, we want these functional tests. And this will allow us to check you over time very quickly and very inexpensively. But it'll break apart a lot of the pieces you get from a neuropsychiatric evaluation. And then if you happen to need something like an MRI or a neuroquant MRI or a SPECT scan, we'll be able to start to correlate those. So that's going to be, that's one of the exciting things for me. Let's see. Elena, you're doing a spectacular job here. There's so many cool ones. I'm getting a little bit of repeat, but, we got that one. I'd much rather go through them and make sure we get all of them than miss any here. So we've got acoustic neuromas. So question is there a connection between Lyme or similar infections and the development of acoustic neuromas? And they said, I know they're benign and slow growing. I have not seen evidence that supports acoustic neuromas being caused by Lyme disease. But again, Lyme and friends are sort of the great instigators. If they cause immune dysfunction and cause chronic low levels, or high levels for that matter, of ongoing inflammation, it's kind of like genetics, right? Genetics are not a big deal until we start to look at the environment in which genetics are expressed. And so if we're changing the internal environment in which you have a potential for something like an acoustic neuroma, we may be able, and it may in bold and quotes and underlines, and it may be italics and flashing lights, but we may be able to, if we got a Lyme infection that was persistent, make the body a more hospitable place for this acoustic neuroma to flourish. We certainly see people who have autoimmune conditions, like say take rheumatoid. I've seen people with rheumatoid arthritis. It looks like they were triggered by they had a genetic potential to get rheumatoid arthritis. They got Lyme, they got rheumatoid arthritis. We treat the Lyme, they still have rheumatoid arthritis. I've seen other people, same scenario, genetic potential, they get rheumatoid Lyme, they get rheumatoid, we treat the Lyme, the rheumatoid then also goes away. So a lot of that has to do with where your body is at when this happens, as well as your genetic potential. So the things that we can control in these scenarios are our thinking, the food we put into our body, our detoxification through sleep, through minimizing our exposure to Wi-Fi and other forms of sort of negative EMF as much as possible, the food, the movement we do, part of the lymphatic, we talk about lymphatics in the head, lymphatic drainage in the arms and the legs. The primary detoxification route in our arms and legs is actually through movement. So that's why when people are traveling a long period of time, especially if they're sick or they're elderly and they're not moving, they're going to get things like, clots in their legs. I've even seen people clots in their arms that way. And then from basically the top of your chest all the way down to the bottom of your pelvis, you need to breathe, right? This is pressure gradient change to flush those toxins. So in the head, it's a bit of gravity and a lot of it's deep, slow wave sleep. From the bottom of the pelvis up to the top of the neck here is pressure gradient changes, and then there's movement in the arms and the legs. Now, it's still going to function if you don't do a lot of that, but that'll help you optimize it. That's why when we're breathing, there's a couple of reasons that we tell people to breathe all the way down into their pelvis and feel their pelvic floor pushing to all the way to the chair or the ground, whatever. And part of that is because we want to, physically pump the lymphatic fluids all the way down in the pelvis. And I've seen miraculous changes, resolution of ulcerative colitis just by getting people to have their pelvic floor muscles relaxed. Some of them are spasmed, you release them, and then you teach them to breathe all the way down. And that way they can flush out toxins more. But also, in order to breathe all the way down to the bottom of your pelvis, we have to breathe into our belly. And now we're going to be descending the diaphragm, that breathing muscle that's it's like right here. Oh, I don't think it goes down that far. Let's see. I'm sure you all know where that is. But, we're way down. I'm going to trip myself. Sorry about that. So when we breathe, we want that diaphragm to descend. And this motion, the bellows motion up and down, one of the things we're going to see is that's actually going to take the solar plexus region, which is that autonomic nervous system of the gut or the second brain that we talked about earlier in the gut, and physically massage it and get some of that stress and strain to relax. So breathing isn't just about getting yourself sort of in a meditative focused state. That's really good. But breathing will physically de-stress your gut and your solar plexus. So that's a really important thing to consider about. Let's see. I think we got most of these here. Oh, this is an awesome question. So mycoplasma infection common in Lyme infection. So Mycoplasma fermentans is something that's been suggested to be a causative agent of Goff-War syndrome, and it may or may not be found in ticks, and it may or may not be transmitted. Mycoplasma has been found in ticks, but by definition, a co-infection just means you have more than one infection at the same time. And as far as tick-borne co-infections, there might be some evidence that mycoplasma may be, but mycoplasma is a very common community-acquired bug, right? And so you don't have to get pneumonia from it to be exposed to mycoplasma and to have it cause problems. It can cause pneumonia. It can persist through long courses of antibiotics over a year. And also, it's been found in the joints of people with rheumatoid arthritis. It's been found in people with poorly healing surgical wounds in the gut. So we found it in the gut wall. So essentially immunosuppressed or in compromised people. But mycoplasma is ubiquitous in our environment, and probably most of the adults who are watching right now have been exposed to it. So mycoplasma can look a lot like Lyme. It can trigger PANS. It can trigger arthritis and stuff. And if you look at the work of the Road Back Foundation, and originally Dr. Brown was doing this work, looking at chlamydia pneumonia and mycoplasma pneumonia as potential triggers of autoimmunity leading to rheumatologic conditions, lupus and scleroderma and rheumatoid. And then they have antibiotic protocols that are essentially very similar to what we use in Lyme and Bartonella to treat these infections and see reversal of the autoimmunity in some cases. And again, some cases not. But so that's in people with Lyme, if you took them pre-Lyme, they were probably exposed to mycoplasma, or they got Lyme and then they got exposed to mycoplasma when they were shopping or when they were going to a Lyme conference, right? So mycoplasma is super common in the environment. The big question to me is it an active problem, kind of active player in the situation? And there's a lot that goes into figuring it out. But that's a spectacular question because a lot of people are like, oh, mycoplasma is causing all these troubles. And, And it's like it's this pandemic or something, but it's a normal thing in our environment, just like being exposed to Wi-Fi is. And so we have to figure out how can we mitigate that if it is an issue. Holy moly, this is a long one. Let's see. Oh, this is a pretty cool. So questions about rickettsial infections, and it could have been released by the military or not. So two things in here. Rickettsial infections are certainly things that are out there, and we have some infections for some. Testing for some and not for others. It's just like we're finding Borrelia mayona and all these other new Borrelias, similar to Lyme but different. I was one of the published 2 of the first 24 cases of Borrelia miyamotoi in the United States, back when there were only 73 cases in the whole world, back in 2014 or so. Prior to 2012, we didn't even know anybody could get it from a tick. But when they look back at stored samples of blood, tons of people who had it's all in your head because they had negative Western blots actually had Borrelia miyamotoi, right? And then a few years after we published that, we start seeing all these people in Florida dying of mouse Ehrlichias. But so they're not human pathogens. So now we have Ehrlichia murus-like, right? And so there's a lot of things out there that we don't know about, or we've seen in ticks, but we don't know if they get in people, maybe just because we don't have a good test in people. We have tests in dogs that are much better for screening for Lyme than in people because of the way their immune systems function compared to ours. And that's unfortunate for us. So that's part of it, is there's so many things out there. And let me see. And certainly if rickettsial infections are part of the co-infections in Lyme, for the best information we know right now, they got bit by a different kind of tick. Right, because the tick, the Ixoides tick that gives you Lyme, Borrelia miyamotoi, Anaplasma, babesiosis, probably Bartonella, does not transmit Rocky Mountain spotted fever because it doesn't carry it. Now, maybe once in a blue moon that happens, but it's more you're going to be getting that from a dog tick bite. Part of what might change in my treatment would be going back and looking at other pathogens that could come from the ticks that are known to transmit rickettsia if I haven't already. And certainly encephalitis can be caused by Lyme and Bartonella, like we talked, as well as rickettsial infections. So we do need to be treating people for those. The other thing is rickettsial infections. There are some herbals that'll work. If we have an acute rickettsial infection, which includes things like anaplasmosis, ehrlichiosis, and Rocky Mountain spotted fever, which is what I was referring to with the dog tick thing. Those are things where I think that antibiotics are probably more necessary in the short run because they could be potentially life-threatening. They're not always mandatory, and I've had some great success with some of the herbals when that's not felt to be a primary thing. But certainly in encephalitis from rickettsial infections, I'd probably be looking at the hospital and having that taken care of. Or if we get it early enough, seeing a practitioner who can prescribe medications for that. But the other part that I want to kind of talk about for a second with this that I think is really important is there's a lot of conspiracy theory out there right now about Plum Island and other military things. And I've talked about this a lot. I've talked about it at ILADS a couple years ago, actually with Dr. Ligner during an experts panel. And it's important to me. Has the government ever been asked if they did something, said they didn't, and then a few years later, we find out they did during my lifetime? Right? Absolutely, they totally did. But if I'm talking to other doctors, researchers, or the heads of hospitals, do I say the Borrelia species has been found in ticks that are over 13 million years old, and I know that humans have been infected for at least the last 5,300 years, right? So Lyme's ancestors have been around way longer than human beings. And rickettsial pathogens have been found in ticks that are over 100 million years old. So these things know how to stick around on the planet, even if the military didn't screw with them. So my feeling is we need to be aware and keep our ears to the ground and our eyes peeled to see what the feeling is out there, what is going on. Is this conspiracy theory thing coming true? Did the military mess up stuff? Did they accidentally let it go or purposely? And those kind of questions. They're important questions. But when we're having conversations with people who can change policy, a pediatrician who sees your children suffering but might be on the fence, personally, I'm going to talk to doctors with science because that's what they're used to. And I've seen changes in my area where infectious disease doctors at children's hospitals are starting to treat children for PANS and PANDAS. sometimes even when their labs are negative, because they're symptomatic, and they're giving them longer courses of antibiotics because they know there's an issue. And it's just amazing to me that some of these people that I've talked to over the years, I just share science, and they make changes because we share the science. So I think conspiracy theories, there probably is some validity that may come out of them, but I'm going to continue to look at the science and share that. And another story is I've worked with a lot of adolescent and child services groups in different states around when they have questions, and they're always really pleased and thankful when I send them a letter summarizing what's going on with references to the science. And when we can give them papers produced by authors from Stanford, Massachusetts General, we can give it, Yale, the National Institute of Mental Health, and things like that, like the authors of the PANS guidelines from a couple of years ago. That's really powerful, right? And then they're published in the peer-reviewed medical literature. These are the things that we need to talk to people about so we can change the conversation. It doesn't mean, again, it's just kind of like when I say, I want you to come in and say, I think I might have Lyme or Bartonella, but then tell me the symptoms. So I want to talk to the doctors in the language they understand, and the administrators and the researchers in the language they understand. But I'm still going to be listening. And when somebody says, hey, what about the conspiracy theory, or what about this other theory? Well, let's keep our eyes out there, but let's not screw up all the progress we've made, because there's been a ton of progress made. So thanks so much for the question. I had a good opportunity to just kind of, go off, on some of these tangents that are super important. And I had this conversation a couple times today in the office. What's so amazing to me is a lot of times in this, we see only the negative pieces, and it's not broadcast all over. But there are doctors in major medical institutions, major children's hospitals, who still have their head in the sand. But there are also doctors in those same institutions who are becoming more and more and more open due to the efforts of people, grassroots, all the way up through the National Institute of Mental Health. They're seeing the science, and the more we stand behind the science, as well as advocating for our children and their rights and saying, hey, my child is suffering. Here's the symptoms. Let the researchers provide this. The group of parents and advocacy groups and professional medical organizations and researchers that are coming together, and we're actually making change, which is just like, I actually didn't think I would see this for another 10 or 15 years, the change that I've seen in the last year. So that's super exciting. Can MRI distinguish between decreased metabolic function from Lyme versus mold toxins versus Alzheimer's versus stroke? So the piece of that is there are different types of MRIs, and typically MRIs are not looking at function. Functional MRIs are, but figuring out what looks kind of like mold or a stroke, I should say, what's potentially from Lyme versus a stroke is typically fairly straightforward, except if you get sort of small vessel white matter changes, which are sort of like mini strokes or mini Lyme problems. Outside of that, like mold toxins, unless you've got in mycotoxicity, the way we talk about it, not somebody who's got some serious aspergillus in their lung and some weird thing going to their brain, or some weird Stachybotrys thing. Those things are not going to really be seen on the regular MRIs, and that's where we have to go back to some of the neuroquants and the functional things. And then the problem is we're seeing a functional change where the functional change from Alzheimer's and the functional change from Lyme may look very similar. So so a lot of times people who see me don't end up getting MRIs or SPECT scans, which would be more commonly used in this situation, because if unless they have like an MS picture, in which case we might need to do that. It all depends, but the bottom line is these are functional scans that are going to show me that function has changed, and unfortunately all of these things really seem to be mimicking each other, so that's where we have to go to our clinical and bring it all together. So why are lymphocytomas around the ear? Well, that's a good one. I can't say I know for sure, but it is off. It's a nice area. It's kind of like when fighters get hit, they get that cauliflower ear, especially the MMA people. It's a really sensitive area. I don't recall, and again, I don't see it. In fact, I've only seen it in pictures. If it's felt to be at the site of the bite, and then that stimulated it or not. that's certainly something we can try to remember to get back to you on a little more details. Thankfully, we don't see too many of those, but I always like when we end up getting questions about that. But I would also suggest that it's possible that some of it has to do with circulation and detoxification pathways that are a little different, say, like in the ear versus the front of the face. I know that in the knee, we do have really poor circulation in the joint capsule, especially the synovial membrane, the bag that's in the knee, which is good because we don't want a lot of blood in there, because otherwise we walk and we'd end up bleeding into our knee, and then our leg would fall off when we were like a couple days old, so that wouldn't be good. But that makes it really hard if Lyme gets into the membrane in our knee, the Lyme spirochete, which is typically where it is. That's hard to get to with our antibiotics, which is one of the reasons I often, in a swollen knee, aside from the systemic treatment, we'll actually use a topical doxycycline so it'll absorb directly into that. It's a little trick for that. And if I ever do see a lymphocytoma, I will probably try that trick on getting it to there too, because I do think some of the membranous qualities of the ear have play a role as well. So I'll see if I can get some more on that to do that. Yeah, does everybody carry Epstein-Barr virus? Certainly, Epstein-Barr virus is very similar to, to mycoplasma. It's ubiquitous. It's the most common cause of mononucleosis. Lots of people are exposed to Epstein-Barr, and they'll get it. They'll be exposed to it. They might have a little sickness. They don't even need to have mono, and then we find it come up. And like the mycoplasma question, it's is this a reactivated viral thing, a persistent viral thing? If it is reactivated, is it primary, like it just came out for some reason, or is it because there's immune suppression from chronic stress, from Lyme disease or BART or whatever? But we do know that it's very similar to chickenpox, which if you got that as a child, it'll lay dormant in your body and then later on can come out as shingles. But if you get shingles, you usually get it once or twice. It's short-lived and goes away. Very few people have long chronic problems with it. Some do. It's tough. But it's interesting. It's like if people get shingles, it's really important to get them on antivirals and certain medications to help prevent persistence of that neuropathy, that the nerve pain that some people will get. And my original training was do that with medications and antibiotics, but you certainly can do that with some herbals as well too. So the question I always have is, trying to sort that out. There are some labs that will help us figure out if the Epstein-Barr is really active or just kind of on the fence. And then often what I'll do is treat the mycotoxins, treat the dietary things to boost the immune function, get the bacterial load of whatever else might be there, Lyme, Bartonella, babesiosis, a parasite down. And once we do that, I keep an eye on that Epstein-Barr. But if I find that the fatigue is lagging and I've done all the other things, maybe I'll jump on top of that and treat it sooner. And it really kind of depends with the Epstein-Barr. It's like any of the questions we've had. We can speculate on a lot of it, and it really depends on your unique presentation. But typically there's a bacterial thing we need to look at first. So, holy moly. Elena, did we get through all of the questions? Oh, yeah, and Diane was saying positive for EBV, but never remember having it. It's very, very common. The publications, I do have all the publications. I can probably try to get those up to you guys over time. What I'll do is I'll start posting some of those. So, Andrea, if you have any specific ones that you're looking for, please just let me know so I can try to focus on that one. In a couple months now, I'll be doing, I've been doing for the last 4 or 5 years, the Lyme Fundamentals program for ILADS with a working group where we've done the evidence-based diagnosis and presentation diagnosis treatment of Lyme. And I do part of my presentation is an hour on Babesia, Bartonella, Borrelia miyamotoi, and brucellosis. And I have something like 190 some references for that 1 hour. So I have a lot of references for you. If you can be specific, I'd be super excited to share the ones that I can get to you and stuff. Diane is asking for thoughts on PEMF therapy, which is pulse electromagnetic frequency. I use it in the office. I find it works amazing for some people, and it's so-so for others. There's a whole bunch of different types out there. I think there's some that are a lot better than others, but we've seen improvements in circulation and detoxification. I've seen people with pain relief from it, that's temporary, but then building up to longer times in between treatments. There are some work showing that if we have veins that have filling defects, meaning they're not filling up all the way after a treatment, that'll change and you'll have good blood flow. People who are exposed to computers, like me standing in front of it and all of you guys, and the Wi-Fi and such, we can have stacking of our red blood cells called rouleau bodies, which just means there's inflammation. You can get it in rheumatoid, you can get in a ton of things. Those rouleau bodies, a stacking of those red cells, will actually improve after exposure to PEMF. So for some people, it's really helpful. I always recommend, if it's something people are interested in, find a provider that knows what they're doing and knows where to start them, and give them a couple of treatments. They're usually very inexpensive, and they're about 30 minutes, sometimes a little longer. And then you can figure out if it's something that might be worthwhile to have at home. So Jessica's asking about positive Lyme tests in your spine. I'm assuming you mean spinal fluid, and certainly you can get antibodies and find Lyme directly in the spinal fluid. Typically with the spinal fluid, what we find though is we don't find Lyme. We see a little extra lymphocytes, we might see some protein, but it's basically a sterile tap, meaning we do the spinal tap and we don't see any bugs. And so they talk about those lymphocytes being up, and that's very common if you have a negative spinal tap with a little bit of lymphocytes, and there are a few other changes we might look for, plus a positive blood test, which is a whole nother can of worms that we can get into some other day. That would be enough to say that that's Lyme disease. So let me do one quick check over here. Yeah, and the Pandas Pans one I think I already did post. And I think we can finish up here because I appreciate it. Everybody, we've been here for 2 hours now. You guys are total warriors. Anxiety and activation, a part of Lyme too. Yeah, I mean, the anxiety and activation of the fight or flight is any time where we're stressed and we're trying to protect ourselves, that can be, turned on. And so Lyme disease and any of these other co-infections certainly can trigger that. They can affect the nerves that control it. They can affect the muscles like the heart and other muscles where these things are going to, and the communication systems. So that's an important part to understand, that it's all these things coming together that could definitely do that. And I had another thought, but I'm having some word finding issues after 2 hours in front of the screen here. Oh yeah, Bransfield. Oh yeah, Bob's got this. I think Bob has posted his work on the iLads website. So if you go to ilads.org, you should be able to find that. And if not, I'll try to pull that up too. And then a lot of the work, Lyme versus MS, was done by Dr. Phillips. He's put some videos out in the past, but certainly we can dive in and find some on that one as well. So let's see here. Yeah, and I think that's probably what we got for the moment. Root. We'll do one more because it's late and we're having a good time. Root canals and having them pulled. I don't see the rest of the whole question. Root canals. It's a huge topic, and it depends on the reason that things are being pulled. I've seen people who have mercury fillings in their mouth and root canals and bridges that cross the midline do phenomenal, and other people who aren't. So this is like soup. This is one of those things where you got to sit down with your biologic dentist and your functional medicine doctor, Lyme doc, whatever, and figure out if that's important. I've seen where people do remove the root canals and it's incredible for them putting an implant in. More commonly, what I'm seeing is people with infected roots need to get them fixed. So oral hygiene is really important, but also some people with dry sockets. I've seen people get dry sockets from where they had their wisdom teeth removed or other teeth lost. They go in, they clean them out. People do much better because there was an infection in there. I've also seen other people have that happen, and they don't see any real benefit from that. So it's a tough one, but again, it's like a lot of the root canal thing is looking at the history. And that's why when we have people come in, I ask them to give me kind of a 1 to 2 page summary of what's happened from starting from before the illness to what's gone on when the illness started and along the way. Because a lot of times you'll find that the root canal doesn't really fit into the picture at all. So maybe that we put on page 2 and we hold off on that until we do the other things. But if it's kind of chronologically or symptomatically really tied into things, it might be something we want to look at a little bit sooner. So Lisa, following up on your thing, had 5 pulled 3 months ago, no significant difference. Yeah, sorry to hear that. That's one of those things where, maybe it's not the big thing there. But again, one of the things too, just looking at where we're going with all this, a lot of times you'll read online, oh, you got to do this or you got to do that. The best treatment for Lyme. If you're not doing what I did to get better, you won't get better. Your Lyme doc's wrong, mine's better. But what a lot of times when somebody has one treatment that makes this big difference after they've been doing treatments for 2 or 3 years, the problem is we forget that a lot of that is training, right? We are taking small steps. Then eventually it starts to get a lot better. So sometimes we're doing groundwork. So I'm hoping what you're going to find with the cavitations being removed and everything is that they're going to be a part of bringing down your body-wide inflammation. They're going to help improve your oral health, which is the first part of your gut and your microbiome. And so that you'll see that I'm really hopeful that moving forward, you'll see that really does help, and again, I mean, if I had infections in my mouth that I knew of, I would probably get them taken care of too. But sometimes the foundational work is foundational. Like we're redoing a lot of stuff at our office right now. We're renovating in the office. I'm changing a lot of our paperwork. We're switching our medical record. And it's like every day I'm like, oh my God, it's just, I know I need the big foundation, but I have so many things I want to go do, but I can't achieve those dreams and those goals, those aspirations without that foundation. And so I hope that kind of falls into that for you. So, wow. Thank you guys so much. I mean, I've gotten so many positive comments. This is a real pleasure for me to be able to do, and I appreciate the Q&A afterwards. Again, check out what we're doing. If you, I'm going to try to go back on our slideshow real quick. Anybody who missed out a little bit earlier, you can certainly go and grab some of the thank you gifts with some of the the 3 PDF downloads that will sort of go over how to apply some of the stuff we talked about today. Let me know if you have any ideas for things you want me to do. I have a bunch of plans for the things that are going to be coming up in the next couple of months. Keep an eye out. Dr. Darren Engels and I are going to continue to do monthly events. Sometime real soon we're going to get a couple of other pediatricians who are friends of ours on to have a big pandas talk. So I think we're going to be doing a lot of work that'll be helpful for everyone. Certainly open to ideas and keep the discussions lively in the group. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a fantastic evening, and I'm super grateful for you all being here with me and the opportunity to serve. So have a great night, and thanks again. It's always fun trying to finish up. Have a great night, everybody.